Everyone ignored the trap set by the billionaire's fiancée. A danger so well hidden that no one questioned her sweet behavior, her perfect smile, or the way she slowly took control of the family's life. People assumed she was kind, loyal, and loving. Even the billionaire himself believed he had finally found someone he could trust. Friends, employees, and close relatives looked at her and saw nothing suspicious. But behind all the charm, there was a plan growing quietly. A plan that no one noticed in time. No one except for the maid, who happened to catch a small detail that didn't fit. A detail so simple, it could have been ignored. Yet that tiny clue opened the door to a truth far darker than anyone expected, revealing the terrifying trap that everyone else failed to see. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Richard Coleman woke up every day feeling the pressure of everything he needed to handle. Even though he lived in a large and comfortable mansion, he could not enjoy it because his mind was always full of meetings, deadlines, and demands from shareholders. Little by little, he felt more tired and distant from the people around him. Emily, his wife, noticed this change and tried to keep the house stable, but the tension between them made everything harder. Richard knew something was wrong, yet he did not know how to fix it. Every day the house felt quieter, not in a peaceful way, but in a strained and uncomfortable one. Emily tried her best to prevent the problems from getting worse. She attempted to talk to Richard, but their conversations often ended in misunderstandings. Every time she approached him gently, he reacted in a way that created another argument. Their words became sharp, even when they did not mean for them to be. Emily missed the days when they could solve problems together without everything turning into a conflict. Now their relationship felt fragile, as if any mistake could cause another disagreement. Noah and Ethan were young, but they clearly sensed something was wrong. They watched their parents' behavior and felt the tension in the air. They noticed the frequent arguments even when Richard and Emily tried to keep their voices low. Sometimes they stayed in their rooms longer than usual to avoid hearing another tense discussion. They also realized that Grace was trying her best to keep things normal, but even her efforts could not remove the heavy feeling in the house. The twins missed simple moments with their parents, moments that used to happen easily. Grace Miller worked hard to keep the household stable. She could see the tension worsening each day and had been with the family long enough to recognize when something was deeply wrong. She kept the house clean, meals prepared, and the routine organized, hoping this would make things a little easier. Grace tried not to speak too much when Richard looked stressed and offered quiet support to Emily whenever possible. She worried about the twins, knowing that children were sensitive to changes around them. Richard finally reached a point where he felt he could not continue living the same way. After months of constant arguments and tension, he told Emily that he wanted a divorce. He said he could no longer handle their daily interactions and that the relationship had become impossible to maintain. Emily was shocked when she heard his decision. She felt a deep pain because even with all the problems, she had hoped that things might improve someday. Even though she was devastated, she tried not to show anger or desperation. She understood that forcing the marriage to continue would not bring happiness to either of them. Emily accepted the divorce, even though it caused her great pain. She did not ask for money or assets, and she made it clear she did not want anything from Richard's fortune. She wanted to start fresh on her own terms. She chose to move to a small, simple house in a quiet area on the outskirts of the city. Noah and Ethan were deeply affected by their parents' separation. Even though they had witnessed many arguments, they still struggled to understand why their family was breaking apart. Grace, who had always been close to them, became an important source of comfort. She listened when they needed to talk and stayed by their side when they felt overwhelmed. Richard tried to focus entirely on his work after the divorce. He believed putting all his attention into his business would help him avoid emotional conflict. He convinced himself that distance from his family would make things easier and allow him to find clarity. Meanwhile, Emily began building a new routine in her small home. The house was simpler and much smaller than the one she had lived in for years, but she embraced it as part of her new life. She focused on small tasks that gave her a sense of control. Even though she felt lonely, she also felt relieved to be away from the arguments and pressure. Richard met Megan Hart during a business event he attended while trying to rebuild his life. She was confident, well-spoken, and carried herself in a way that made people notice her. Megan showed interest in what Richard said and listened carefully whenever he talked about business or personal experiences. She complimented him often, calling him intelligent and dedicated, and these comments affected him more than he expected. He had been feeling empty after the divorce, and her attention made him feel valued again. Their conversation flowed easily, and it surprised him how fast he felt a connection. As the days passed, Richard continued communicating with Megan. She always responded quickly and made sure he felt heard. After the difficulties he had gone through, Megan's interest felt like a relief. She told him she admired his determination and the way he managed his company. Richard interpreted her words as genuine admiration. He slowly started including her in parts of his routine, believing that Megan could fill the emotional space left open after the end of his marriage. Richard eventually decided it was time for his children to meet Megan. He hoped that Noah and Ethan would accept her the same way he had. However, when he introduced her to them, the reaction was not what he expected. Noah and Ethan behaved politely but distant. They barely spoke, and when they did, their answers were short and cautious. They watched Megan closely, unsure of how to act around her. Richard noticed their cold behavior, but thought it was only because they were still adjusting to the divorce. Grace observed everything quietly. She had known Richard and the children for a long time and understood their behavior well. As she watched Megan interact with the boys, she noticed a certain controlled tone in Megan's actions. Megan smiled often and seemed kind, but something about her behavior felt planned, as if she measured her words carefully. Grace did not say anything out loud because she knew it was not her place to judge Richard's personal choices. Still, she could not ignore the details she picked up. With time, Megan began visiting the mansion every day. At first, Richard thought this was a sign that she cared about him and wanted to be part of his life, so he did not question it. Megan started walking through the house as if she already belonged there. She paid attention to how things were cleaned, how objects were placed, and how the routine worked. She made comments about small things she thought should change, even when no one asked for her opinion. Richard, tired from work and overwhelmed, accepted these comments without thinking much about them. As Megan's visits became part of the routine, she started acting in a way that made her seem responsible for how the house should function. She spoke confidently and corrected things that did not match her preferences. Sometimes she rearranged objects, adjusted schedules, or questioned how tasks were done. Grace watched these changes quietly. She had always paid attention to the house and to the people living in it. Now she saw how Megan tried to control things that had never been a problem before. Noah and Ethan felt increasingly uncomfortable with Megan's constant presence. They did not trust her and avoided interacting with her as much as possible. When she entered a room, they often stayed quiet or walked away. They felt judged by her. Even during small moments, Megan sometimes commented on their behavior, their routines, or the way they did simple tasks. The boys sensed that she did not like spending time alone with them. They sought comfort in Grace, who always made them feel safe and understood. Megan began creating accusations against Grace in a slow but constant manner. She first mentioned small things, saying that Grace had forgotten simple tasks or made unnecessary mistakes. Soon, these small accusations grew into more serious claims. Megan said that Grace was causing problems inside the house on purpose and repeated these ideas whenever she had the chance. She also claimed that Grace treated Noah and Ethan in an inappropriate way, even though she never showed clear evidence. Richard was surprised by these accusations because he had trusted Grace for years, but Megan insisted she was trying to protect him and the children. Noah and Ethan quickly realized that the situation was unfair. They trusted Grace completely and could not accept the accusations Megan made against her. The twins tried to tell Richard that Grace would never harm them or act poorly. They explained that she always treated them with kindness, patience, and respect. However, Richard was torn. He wanted to trust his children, but Megan's constant complaints had made him uncertain. Richard found himself caught between exhaustion and confusion. He wanted peace inside his home, but the constant complaints overwhelmed him. Megan spoke with urgency, repeating her accusations with increasing pressure. She insisted that dismissing Grace would solve the problem she described. Feeling overwhelmed and uncertain, he began to believe that dismissing Grace might be the only way to restore calm. The moment Richard decided to dismiss Grace was heavy for everyone involved. He called her to talk, trying to keep his tone neutral, but his confusion showed through. Grace listened carefully, shocked as he repeated the accusations. She tried to explain that she had never acted in any harmful way, especially toward Noah and Ethan. Grace left the mansion quietly, carrying a feeling of confusion and deep sorrow. She walked away without fully understanding how Megan had turned Richard against her. Noah and Ethan felt devastated as they watched her go. They hugged her tightly, trying to tell her how much she meant to them, but the situation could not be changed. Grace moved temporarily into Emily's home, and the transition felt emotional for both of them. Emily welcomed her with genuine gratitude, recognizing everything Grace had done for Noah and Ethan throughout the years. Meanwhile, Megan became even more present in Richard's daily routine. She positioned herself as someone essential in his life and tried to fill every space that once belonged to his family. Richard accepted this presence without questioning it, believing that Megan was simply helping him move forward. Emily observed everything from a distance. She heard pieces of information through the twins and sometimes through simple comments Richard made. Although she was no longer part of his home, she could tell that he was becoming emotionally dependent on Megan. Grace also carried heavy concerns, even though she no longer lived in the mansion. She thought about Noah and Ethan constantly, remembering their expressions during difficult moments and their sadness when she left. She worried about how they were being treated now that Megan had gained more influence. Grace returned to the mansion on a quiet afternoon, hoping to collect a few personal belongings she had left behind. She chose a time when she knew Richard and Megan would not be home because she did not want any confrontation. As she made her way toward the area where she believed her belongings were stored, Grace walked past Richard's office. The door was slightly open, and inside she immediately noticed something unexpected. Megan's laptop was on the desk, still open with the screen lit. It was unusual to see a device left unattended like that. The sight caught Grace's attention, and although she had no intention of invading anyone's privacy, something in her memory triggered a sense of unease. Grace approached the desk slowly, her hands slightly trembling. She leaned forward and looked at the screen more closely. The laptop displayed an email tab still logged in, with several messages visible. As she began scanning the emails, her breath caught. The messages contained detailed conversations describing plans involving Richard and the twins. There were explanations, methods, and motivations tied to the family's fortune. Grace read references to eliminating them permanently, something she never imagined she would encounter. She continued reading, and each sentence felt more disturbing than the last. These were not simple threats or vague statements. They outlined intentional actions, clearly describing steps someone planned to take. As Grace kept reading, she found messages that described a specific method meant to cause harm to the family. One email mentioned plans related to sabotaging the family's car. The details were written clearly, explaining how the sabotage could lead to a deadly accident. There was no doubt about the intention. The messages discussed the inheritance and the benefits that would come from Richard and the twins' deaths. Grace felt horrified. The tone of the emails showed no hesitation, no second thoughts. Grace stepped back from the desk, her heart pounding fast, and tried to calm herself. But the fear only grew stronger. She realized that she could not stay in the room any longer. If Megan or Richard returned and found her there, things could turn dangerous very quickly. She glanced once more at the laptop, unable to forget the violent plans she had just read. Her mind raced through every moment she had witnessed in the mansion, remembering Megan's irritation towards the twins, the manipulative behavior, and the way she pushed Grace out of the house. Everything made sense now, but the realization was almost too heavy to bear. When Grace finally stepped outside the mansion, she felt a surge of desperation. The air felt heavy, and she struggled to process everything she had seen. She did not stop to talk to anyone. All she could think about was getting as far away as possible and finding a safe place to plan her next steps. Her mind replayed the emails over and over, the references to murder, the mention of the inheritance, and the specific plan to sabotage the car. The danger was real, immediate, and terrifying. Richard started his morning following the same routine he had practiced for years. He walked through the house collecting the boys' school materials and making sure nothing important was missing. He picked up their backpacks from the living room and placed them on the table to confirm that everything was organized. Noah and Ethan stood nearby, waiting quietly while he finished the last details. Richard called their names gently and told the boys to head toward the garage while he grabbed his keys. Everything looked normal, and he saw no sign that anything unusual was happening. Noah and Ethan walked toward the car slowly, each carrying a backpack almost as big as their small shoulders. They knew the routine well, but they still felt uneasy. When they reached the car, they waited for their father to unlock the doors. Richard approached with quick steps, opened the back door, and helped them climb into their seats. He reminded them to put on their seatbelts properly, checking each buckle. The twins answered in short sentences, not feeling very talkative. Inside the house, Megan stood near the doorway, watching the scene with a calm and distant expression. She did not speak, nor did she offer to help with the children. Instead, she leaned slightly against the doorframe, maintaining a composed posture. Her eyes followed Richard's movements as he prepared the boys and checked the time. Megan appeared relaxed, but her stillness created an odd contrast with Richard's hurried pace. She made no attempt to interact with Noah or Ethan, who avoided looking in her direction. Richard entered the driver's seat and closed the door, placing the keys in the ignition. He took a moment to adjust the mirrors and glanced at the time again. The boys sat silently in the back, waiting for him to start the drive. He turned on the engine and listened to the steady sound of the car starting. He looked toward the house one last time, noticing Megan still standing there with the same quiet posture. Grace arrived at the mansion running out of breath, her heart pounding from fear and urgency. She did not stop to greet anyone or explain why she was there. The only thing in her mind was reaching Richard before he drove away with the twins. As she approached the driveway, she saw the car slowly preparing to move, and panic pushed her to run even faster. She moved directly toward the vehicle and placed herself beside it, waving her arms and yelling loudly for Richard to stop. Her voice carried desperation. She shouted his name again, trying to get his attention before he pulled out of the driveway. Richard stepped out of the car with a stunned expression. He did not understand why Grace had appeared so suddenly, or why she was shouting with such urgency. At first he thought there had been some misunderstanding, but the fear in Grace's voice made it impossible to ignore her warning. She insisted that the brakes had been cut. Richard felt a mixture of disbelief and concern. He hurried around to the driver's side, opening the door again. He sat down just long enough to test the brake pedal with his foot. When he pressed it, there was no resistance at all. The pedal dropped to the floor with ease. Richard froze, staring forward in shock. The reality hit him suddenly, and he stepped back from the car with wide eyes. Megan stood at a distance near the entrance of the house. She watched the scene unfold without moving closer or showing concern. Her posture remained stiff, and her expression did not change even as Richard tested the brakes and discovered that something was wrong. She did not speak or ask questions. Instead, she stayed where she was, almost detached from the chaos happening right in front of her. Richard acted quickly after discovering the danger. His hands were still shaking, but he forced himself to stay focused. He took out his phone and contacted the authorities immediately. Within a short time, police vehicles reached the mansion, filling the driveway with flashing lights and uniformed agents. The agents inspected the brake system and confirmed that the lines had been deliberately cut. Their confirmation made the situation even more real for everyone standing there. While some officers focused on the car, others began searching the house for additional evidence. They asked Richard where Megan was, and he pointed toward the area where she had been standing earlier. The agents approached her and asked her to remain still as they questioned her. Not long after, they received confirmation from the team inside the house. They had found messages and files that supported the accusations Grace had reported. Based on this information, the officers informed Megan that she would be taken into custody. Emily arrived soon after being informed about what had happened. When she finally saw Richard standing near the driveway surrounded by officers, she felt a mixture of fear and relief. She approached him quickly, and he immediately apologized, speaking with sincerity. He explained how sorry he was for not seeing the manipulation earlier and for the danger that had come so close to their family. Emily reassured him that the most important thing was that he and the twins were safe. Noah and Ethan ran to their mother as soon as they saw her. Their faces showed clear relief and emotion. They hugged her tightly, holding on to the sense of safety she always brought them. Emily crouched down to reassure them, checking if they were hurt or scared. Grace stood beside them, offering support in her gentle way. The twins also embraced Grace, showing how much they trusted and appreciated her. They told their mother how Grace had helped save them and how she had warned their father in time. Emily looked at Grace with gratitude, understanding the importance of her actions. Grace received sincere thanks from Richard and Emily. Richard told her how grateful he was for her courage and quick reaction. Emily repeated the same appreciation, knowing Grace had acted selflessly to protect the family. Grace felt emotional as she listened to their words. She had gone through confusion, fear, and injustice, but now she finally saw that her efforts had made a difference. When the authorities finally left, the family gathered inside the house to process everything they had been through. Richard sat with Emily, the twins, and Grace, reflecting on how drastically the day had changed their lives. They discussed what had happened, trying to understand the danger they had narrowly escaped. The emotions ranged from fear to relief, but also gratitude. They recognized that despite the chaos, they were still together and safe. The reunion brought a sense of unity that had been missing for a long time and reminded them of the importance of protecting one another.